God, baby, you're really good. Every time I think it won't get any better, and every time it happens. Bobby reached out and touched her breast. His touch caused a slight trembling in her. Hey, Lulu, aren't I better than Marty? He asked. She didn't even hesitate. Much better, she said. So much better, she continued, that I hope you can do it again before I get home. He could. When Marty slipped into the house, Louise was already in bed. He poked his head through the bedroom door, but her regular breathing told him that she was fast asleep. He returned to the kitchen and sat down at the dining table. So, what now? He asked himself rhetorically. He knew he should go to bed himself, but he was still too wound up from his night's work at the printing plant to sleep. He thought about waking Louise up and seeing if he couldn't love her a little, but quickly dismissed the thought. She will be very angry if he wakes her up. Damn it! Working the evening shift from 4 to midnight is just ruining my life. When Bobby offered the job a month ago, the idea seemed so tempting. Marty wanted to do something with the house, but money was always tight, in no small part because Louise spent money like it grew on trees. Marty was just worrying about a situation at work when Bobby suddenly suggested, "You should think about moving to the second shift. Differentiated shift pay will be very useful for the two of you." Marty was pleasantly surprised to find that Louise didn't mind when he brought it up, so he volunteered to change jobs, and the jump in his first week's pay made Marty feel pretty smart. For the same number of hours a week, with only minor inconveniences, he now received a good increase in salary. But the minor inconvenience soon became more serious than Marty had anticipated. Firstly, it was difficult for him to get used to the new sleep pattern. All his life, Marty had been accustomed to coming home from work or college and relaxing for hours before going to bed. Now, returning home after midnight, he found it almost impossible to go straight to bed. Soon, he became an owl. Marty also discovered that the new schedule significantly reduced the time he could spend with his wife. By the time he woke up on weekdays, she was long gone to work as an assistant at a retirement center. Consequently, the only chance they had to spend time together was on weekends. One of the main results was that the new working hours significantly reduced his personal life. To top it all off, rather than increasing Louise's libido, the lack of activity for a week seemed to decrease her appetite when they spent time together. On Saturday nights, Marty found himself having to suck up and coax her into some fun between the sheets. Finally, to top it all off, Marty discovered that most of the raise he had sacrificed so much for was not actually being saved between the two of them. For Louise, the money in their joint checking account was something to be spent, and she seemed to fill even more of her time with shopping. To make matters worse, Marty was hesitant to sit down and talk to Louise about her shopping habits. The only chance he had for such a conversation was on the weekend, when he hoped to sleep with her. There's nothing like a lecture on overspending on your wife to kill any chance of late-night passion. Marty hoped to invest the extra income in their old Victorian house with a beautiful large yard. They were able to buy it because the widow who previously owned it had allowed the house to fall into serious disrepair. Marty and Louise stretched their budget to buy an old house, and Marty spent most of his free time renovating it. He was very proud of what he had achieved, but he had even bigger plans for the renovation. Tonight, as he sat in the dark living room, those dreams seemed more distant than ever. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," Marty groaned. It took him an hour before he was relaxed enough to slip into bed next to his sleeping wife. When he woke up, it was already mid-morning. Having had breakfast quickly, he put on some old clothes and went out to mow the lawn. Pushing the old lawnmower around the property in the Georgia heat had taken him a couple of hours and a lot of sweat, and he was heartbroken that they didn't have the money to buy a rideable lawnmower. On his way to work that day, Marty stopped at the gas station convenience store near the printing plant to fill up the tank of his SUV. While waiting at the counter to pay for gas, he noticed a Georgia lottery sign. "Add a couple of lottery tickets, Millie," he said to the elderly store owner. "Luck has been in my debt for a long time." "You're just in time, dear. The draw is tomorrow. I hope you win." She smiled at him. giving him his change and 2 tickets. He put them in his wallet and forgot. The evening shift was hard. Usually, the large Heidelberg press worked on its own, but the evening schedule required several short passes of the press, each of which required Marty to clean the rollers, attach 4 new color plates, and then carefully monitor the rolling until all 4 were printed. One of the passes required a 5th color, which made setting up and printing much more labor-intensive. By the end of his shift, Marty was exhausted, but when he returned home, he again found himself too nervous to sleep. He plopped down in his favorite chair and picked up the remote control to turn on the TV, but decided against it. Instead, he sat quietly, sipping his beer and reflecting on his life. Marty was the 3rd child in the family, after his older brother and sister. He grew up quiet, practical, a good student, and an avid reader. He had friends, thanks in part to his popular older brother and sister, but he was on the periphery of the crowd's popularity in high school. Not being athletically gifted, he volunteered to become the leader of the basketball team. In the summer, he often went hunting with his father and loved silence and solitude. But these outings mostly stopped as soon as he turned 16. A friend of his father got Marty a summer job at a large printing company in town. As a result, Marty strengthened his lean frame by moving large pallets of paper from the loading dock to corresponding presses throughout the sprawling facility. Perhaps it was these changes in his appearance that attracted Louise Luttrell to him. She was one of the most beautiful girls in the popular crowd and was dating some of the players on the football team. But something about Marty attracted her, and they began dating during their senior year and soon became a permanent couple. After graduating from high school, Marty planned to attend a local community college. But in his senior year, his father, a carpenter, fell through the ceiling at work and became permanently disabled. A blue-collar worker's wages and his mother's job at a discount store allowed the family to survive. But college was no longer an option for their youngest son. Marty swallowed his disappointment and went looking for work. Fortunately, during the summer, he made a good impression on the management of the printing house, and he managed to get a job as an apprentice printer. Louise went to local college, but she and Marty continued to live together. They married in a low-key ceremony as she received her associate's bachelor's degree. By then, Marty had saved enough money to put a down payment on a house that needed renovation, and the 2 of them began married life in their own home. They agreed that the children would wait until they were able to get back on their feet financially. They had beautiful dreams, but over the next few years, those dreams seemed to fade like a photograph left in the sun, washed away by the bills they had to pay, the housework and the daily routine that life imposed. Where did all this go? Marty asked himself. And more importantly, what can we do to get him back? Awakening from his reverie, Marty tiptoed into the bedroom, undressed and slid under the covers. Even in his sleep, Louise seemed beautiful to him, and he involuntarily tensed. I can't wait for this weekend, he thought before closing his eyes. When Marty finally woke up the next morning, he was shocked to find that it was almost 10 in the morning and Louise had left for work without disturbing him. Today he planned to finish installing drywall in one of the rooms they weren't using. So he quickly made himself breakfast and then got out the mounting tape and putty. He had already attached large sheets of drywall with the help of his friend Terry Cummings, and now he had to putty and seal the seams. By the time everything was ready for sanding, it was already 2:30 in the evening, so he put down his tools and made himself a sandwich. After lunch, he made dinner to take to work and then jumped into the shower. By this time, it was time to go to work. Luckily, the evening shift was quite normal, so by midnight, Marty wasn't too tired or stressed. However, when he returned home, he was not yet ready to go to bed and turned on the TV quietly so as not to wake Louise. He was just leaning back in his chair when the Georgia lottery game appeared on the screen. A pretty woman stood in front of a $10 million banner reading out the winning numbers displayed on the screen below her. Marty lazily pulled the tickets out of his wallet to compare them, and his breath caught in his throat. He quickly grabbed a pencil and scribbled down the numbers on the screen, then compared them again to the ticket he held in his hand. They completely matched. He jumped out of his chair and ran into the bedroom. "We won, Louise! We won!" he shouted, shaking her vigorously. "Leave me alone, Marty," she muttered. "I want to sleep." No, you have to wake up," Marty insisted. "We won the lottery." "Yes, and I am the Queen of England," she said. "Now let me sleep before I get angry." "Baby," Marty shouted. "I'm not kidding, we won the lottery. We are millionaires. Look at the ticket." Louise tried to sit up and looked suspiciously at her husband jumping near the bed. "Let me see," she said, and took the winning ticket from his hands. She went to their home computer and connected to the lottery website. Seeing the winning number and comparing it with the ticket in her hand, she jumped up and shouted, "Oh my God, Marty, we just won 10 million. They hugged each other and started dancing around the room until they lost their balance and fell onto the bed. The couple began to kiss out of happiness, which quickly grew into passion. Marty grabbed his wife's nightgown and tore it off in a hurry. "It was my good nightgown," Louise screamed, but Marty just laughed. "It doesn't matter, baby. I can afford to buy you another one." She laughed and hugged him even tighter. Soon they were making love with a frantic passion that rivaled their first years together. They didn't last long, but they were both so excited that it didn't matter. Exhausted, they collapsed and quickly fell asleep. When Marty woke up, he realized from the way the sun was shining through the window that it was already late. When he rolled over, he was shocked to find his sleeping wife. "Louise, wake up," he said excitedly. "You're late for work." She opened her eyes and smiled widely. "No," she said. "I called and quit. I'll never have to take care of those old farts again." Marty was surprised but decided not to say anything. He wished Louise wasn't so impulsive. He felt that they should think things through carefully before doing anything rash. After breakfast, Louise wanted to call her family to tell them the good news, but Marty persuaded her to wait. "Baby, we need to contact the lottery people and ask them to check the numbers before we start going crazy. And even if we won, we shouldn't rush and need to think about everything." "Oh, Marty, you're being stupid," Louise snapped. "We both saw the winning number on the website, and the winning ticket is in our hands. All we have to do is go and pick up a check for $10 million. "That's different, Louise," Marty said. "I don't think we should get everything as a lump sum. If we request monthly payments, we will have more money in total than we ever have in our lives, and we will be sure that we will not spend it all on something stupid." Marty could see that Louise didn't like what he was saying, but she didn't argue with him, for which he was grateful. After a while, she looked at him with a grin and asked, "So what are you going to do today, Mr. Millionaire?" "My father knows an accountant here in the city. I'll try to meet him after lunch to talk about what to do with the money. In the meantime, it's probably time to go to work," Marty replied. "Why on earth would you return to this place?" Louise asked incredulously. "You're rich. You'll never have to work again." "I just think we don't need to rush, baby," Marty said. "I don't want to do something quickly that we might regret later. Let me talk to this guy and see what he says, and then we'll decide what to do, okay?" Louise gave him a stubborn look, but said nothing. This made Marty nervous, but he decided that this was the best he could get out of her, so he went to call. The accountant's advice was eye-opening. Marty soon realized that many of his initial assumptions were wrong. The accountant even gave Marty a copy of an article from CPA Practice Advisor, a technology and practice management resource for accounting and tax professionals, about lottery winners and the pitfalls they face. It was a sobering experience, and Marty began to realize that things weren't going to be as easy as he thought. From the certified public accountant's office, Marty went to work. The shift started out normal enough, but shortly after the lunch break, a noise was heard in the background. Then Marty heard loud voices, and it even seemed to him that someone was shouting his name. As he turned away from the press he was working on, he saw Terry, his best friend on the shop floor, walking towards him with a big smile on his face. "Oh, you lucky son of a bitch," Terry yelled. "Why didn't you tell me that you won the lottery?" Before Marty could think of anything to say, Terry was shaking his hand and other employees were crowding around, patting him on the back. The questions flew fast and furious. Was he going to quit his job? What is he going to buy first? Will he take a lump sum payment or monthly checks? Marty was stunned. He turned to Terry and asked, "How did you know? We were going to keep it a secret until we figured out what to do. It was on the 6 o'clock news, so now everyone in town knows about it." Just at this moment, the director of the printing house came to try to disperse the commotion, but without much success. Finally, he turned to Marty. "Look, why don't you take a sick day and go home, Marty? Otherwise, we won't finish our work tonight." Marty apologized for disturbing him and headed to his SUV. He was upset by the premature revelation of their good fortune and couldn't wait to ask Louise what was wrong. But when he returned home, he found a circus on the front lawn with a crowd of friends and relatives, reporters, and a news truck. As soon as he opened the door of his SUV, he was immediately pulled into the middle of the chaos. Louise stood in the spot of light from the lamps installed by the television crew. As Marty walked toward her, he couldn't help but notice that she had combed her hair and put on her most beautiful dress. Apparently, the reporters didn't take her by surprise. His blood pressure went up a few more notches. He grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the reporter who was trying to interview her. "What the hell is going on, Louise?" he demanded. "We agreed that we would keep this a secret until we decided what to do." "Don't be upset, Marty," Louise said. "I just had to tell my family, and I think it all took off from them. And the next thing I knew, Channel 4 was calling me to set up an interview. Anyway, it's too late now, so we might as well enjoy it." With these words, she turned to the reporter and continued the interview. Marty could do nothing but stand sullenly while Louise happily chatted in front of the cameras. The ordeal wasn't over when the crew finally packed up and left. Several of their neighbors and friends continued to mill around, each wanting a chance to congratulate Marty and Louise on their good fortune. Even after the couple finally retreated to the safety of their home, the phone continued to ring from well-wishers until Marty finally disconnected the call and let the answering machine handle everything. He plopped down on the sofa and looked at his wife. "It would be better if you didn't tell anyone yet," he said sadly. "Our lives just got so damn complicated." Louise was unperturbed. "Don't be so suspicious, Marty. There are no complications that $10 million can't fix." Marty shook his head. "First of all, Louise, the accountant said that we won't get $10 million. Uncle Sam and the state of Georgia will have their share before we see a penny. And secondly, if you take all the money at once, they will give you only part of the total amount. I think we would be much better off taking the money in installments rather than all at once. This way, we will get more. And besides, many winners have gotten into trouble trying to handle so much money." Louise shook her head irritably. "Well, now you're acting stupid, Marty. There are a lot of things I want to do, and now we finally have the money to do them. There is no reason to turn off the tap when we have a full lake to draw from." Marty just shook his head. "We'll talk about this again when everything calms down a little," he said, and went to open a can of beer. Over the next few days, the frenzy over the news began to subside, but Marty and Louise continued to be besieged by visitors and guests. They also began receiving offers from luxury car dealers and high-end real estate brokers, each hoping to make a big sale to the new millionaires in the area. But despite all the distractions and interruptions, the disagreement between Marty and Louise continued without the slightest sign of resolution. How to handle money became such a bone of contention between them that by the end of the weekend, Marty was happy to be back at work. Around 5:30 in the evening, Bobby Womack's phone rang. "Hey, Bobby," Louise's voice was heard. "When are you coming to see me again?" Bobby laughed. "Now that you're rich, I wasn't sure you'd be interested in dating me." Then he heard dissatisfaction in her voice. "Oh, Bobby, you know I wouldn't do that." "Well, Lulu, in high school you just blew me off," he replied. "Yeah, but that's because you got caught with weed and had to drop out of school. My dad would have killed me if he caught me talking to you after what happened." Bobby just laughed. "Be that as it may, now Dad is not around, nor is this stinking husband of mine," Louise continued in an insinuating voice. "So why don't you come?" "I don't know, Louise. "I've never had sex with a millionaire before," he said. "Well, if you drag yourself here, then maybe you'll have a chance," she said impatiently. He laughed and hung up. While waiting for her lover after their conversation, Louise remembered her school days. Bobby Womack was her first, and she fell head over heels for him. But their relationship ended when the school principal found marijuana in Bobby's locker. Although the allegations that he was involved in trafficking were never proven, the school board had more than enough reasons to expel him. His family moved out of town, and his father strictly told Louise never to have anything to do with Bobby again, no matter where he was. Her heart was broken, of course, but over time she became drawn to the quiet young man who seemed so thoughtful and understanding. Their relationship slowly blossomed, and by graduation there was no doubt about what the future held. Even when Marty had to drop out of college due to his father's injury, Louise remained devoted to him, and they finally tied the knot when she received her associate's degree. And then, Louise recalled, one day Marty came home from work and said that his old classmate Bobby Womack had returned to town and was now working in the same printing house. Louise said nothing then, but at the mention of his name, her heart sank. Later that year, at a company picnic, she decided to rekindle her relationship with her ex-boyfriend. They found it difficult to see each other until Bobby suggested that Marty move to the second shift. Since then, Louise regularly spent time with him. "God, how I needed this," Louise gasped 2 hours later, rolling off Bobby and lying next to him on the bed. "What's the matter, Lulu? Is your hubby not doing his duty?" Bobby teased. "No, he doesn't," she objected hotly. "And besides, he takes lottery money very seriously. He wants us to take the money over 26 years, not all at once. He's such a bore." Bobby turned and looked at her shrewdly. "You know, Lulu, it shouldn't be like this. I know a way you could get a whole bunch of this money just for yourself. You don't even have to fool Marty to spend it." Louise turned and looked at him expectantly. "Really? Let's listen," she said. When Marty returned to work at the print shop on Monday evening, everything seemed to have calmed down. Several of his friends came over to pat him on the back, while others expressed surprise that he didn't immediately quit his job. Marty tried his best to take it all in stride, but he noticed that every time he came here, the conversations in the background seemed to fade away. He had never wanted to be the center of attention, and now that he was in this position, he found that he didn't like it. The next 2 days continued in the same vein. The only real difference Marty saw was that some of the looks he got were no longer smiling. Some men even looked at him with open indignation. "What does all of this mean?" Marty was surprised. "I never did anything to them." Nevertheless, he felt uneasy. By Friday evening before the lunch break, everything seemed to be back to normal. Marty was having lunch with Terry when he saw the shift supervisor approaching him, accompanied by a stranger in a suit and tie. Marty looked up curiously as the manager approached him. "Sorry to interrupt your dinner, Marty, but this guy said he needs to talk to you urgently." The stranger stepped forward and asked, "Are you Martin Goodpasture?" When Marty acknowledged this fact, the man thrust an envelope into his hands and said, "You have been served." As Marty looked at him in confusion, the guy turned on his heel and walked away. Marty turned to Terry and asked, "What do you mean, you were served?" Terry shook his head in confusion, but the shift manager turned and motioned to the other men crowded around. "Now, guys, get back to work." Then, as the rest of the workers reluctantly left, he turned to the 2 men sitting at the table. "Marty, I believe if you look at these papers, you will see that your wife has filed for divorce. The same thing happened when my wife left me." "Divorce?" Marty gasped in shock. "This can't be." Terry took the envelope from Marty and began to examine its contents. "I'm not a lawyer," he told his friend, "but I think he's right. It says that this is a petition for divorce." Marty looked at Terry incredulously. "There's some kind of mistake here." Then he turned to the shift supervisor. "I need to go home and talk to Louise. I have to get everything straightened out right now." The manager looked at him sadly. "Come on, Marty. Just don't do anything crazy, you hear? As he drove home from the printing shop, Marty's thoughts were in turmoil. They became even more excited when he spotted Bobby Womack's red SUV parked in the driveway. Marty pulled up behind the big red Dodge Ram and rushed to the front door of his house. To his horror, the key did not fit the lock of the front door. After several unsuccessful attempts, he began banging on the door. "Louise! Louise! Let me in!" he shouted, but there was no answer. Suddenly, his cell phone rang, and when he picked up the receiver, he heard his wife's voice. "Marty, stop knocking on the door. What are you trying to do? Disturb the neighbors?" "There's something wrong with the lock, Louise. It won't open." "It won't open," she said calmly, "because I changed all the locks after you left for work." "Why did you do this, Louise?" Marty asked. "I know they brought papers to you at work, Marty. You know very well that we are getting a divorce, and I don't want you to come to this house anymore." "But this is my house!" Marty shouted angrily. "I live here. You can't lock yourself away from me in my own house." "Well, I can, and I've already done it," she answered quickly. "But my lawyer says that the court should decide who gets the house." Marty began to curse, pacing back and forth. When he noticed the SUV again, he asked angrily, "What's Bobby Womack doing here?" "I recognize his hefty SUV. Bobby came here to comfort me during this difficult time," Louise said, giggling. "Besides, I needed his help to change the locks and remove all your things." Marty looked around and noticed it for the first time, the black garbage bags sitting in the driveway. Suddenly, Louise's voice became serious. "Be that as it may, all this is none of your business. So, just leave before I have to call the police on you for disturbing the peace." Just before she turned off the phony, Marty thought he heard Bobby laughing in the background. Marty tried to call her, but she refused to answer. Furious, he slammed his cell phone shut and headed toward the garage. It was locked, but the side door was open, and Marty slipped inside. Hidden on the top shelf behind some boxes was his 9mm pistol. He pulled it out, quickly checked to see if it was charged, and tucked it into his belt. Approaching the front door, he noticed that several of his neighbors were looking out of their windows at the noise. He stopped and pulled himself together. "What am I thinking about?" he asked himself. "It's not worth going to jail for this." Ashamed of his thoughts, he hurried to the garbage bags and, making sure that they contained his clothes and personal belongings, put them in the back of the SUV. Then, angry and frustrated, he drove away with his tires squealing. He only drove a few blocks before pulling over to the side of the road to think. What should I do now? I was thrown out of my own home with nothing but clothes, and I don't even have a place to sleep. Finally, he took out the phone and called. "Mom, do you mind if I stay with you today? I'll explain everything when I arrive." And Marty arrived. His parents were sitting at the kitchen table. His mother and father loved Louise very much, and Marty was soon subjected to intense interrogation. "What did you do that she threw you out?" asked the mother when he finished his story about the previous evening. "Mom, I didn't do anything. Only recently we loved each other, and the next day she threw me out. I think it's because of the damn lottery that she's gone crazy or something." It was clear that his parents had their doubts, but they left him alone, and he was able to go back to his old room and try to get some sleep. Marty spent a lousy weekend, mostly sitting in his old room, trying to sort through his emotions and understand what happened. In many ways, he felt like he was riding on the old-school playground carousel again. One minute he felt angry and vindictive towards Louise. The next he was full of loneliness and longing for his wife and the happy marriage that he once had. Elaborate plans for retribution were accompanied by denial that any of this was actually happening. The only relief he could find was when he went to the park to jog and do gymnastics. His cell phone rang on Saturday afternoon, and he impatiently picked it up, hoping it was Louise calling to tell him it was all a mistake. Instead, he was invited to dinner by Terry on Sunday. Marty was glad to have the opportunity to get out from under his mother's suspicious gaze, so he gratefully agreed. Marty usually slept late on weekends, but now he found himself waking up early. his head still filled with pain from Louise's actions and conflicting thoughts about how to react. When it happened again on Sunday morning, Marty decided to go to church, hoping for some spiritual guidance. The decision turned out to be disastrous. As he sat on the bench, all he could think about was the families that sat around him. They made him feel his own loss more acutely than before, and he could not concentrate on the preacher's words. But that wasn't the worst. After the service, Marty tried to sneak away as quickly as possible so as not to talk to friends and acquaintances. But he was stopped by the crowd of parishioners outside, and suddenly he saw Louise's parents, the Luttrells, heading towards him. "And you still have the audacity to come to the house of God after what you did to my daughter?" said the old man in a loud, angry voice. Marty was stunned. "I didn't do anything to Louise, Mr. Luttrell," he protested. "She's the one who kicked me out." "Of course," my father shouted, "after I caught you with some girl while she was working in a nursing home." "Is that what Louise said?" Marty asked in surprise. "But this is not true. I have never touched another woman." A crowd gathered around them, waiting to see what would happen. "My Louise immediately said that you would deny everything," the old man fumed. "Well, you can just take your damn lottery money and make any tramp you want happy. But if I were a few years younger, I would probably teach you a lesson," the old man scolded, shaking his fist in Marty's face. Mrs. Luttrell grabbed her husband's arm and pulled him away from Marty. The man was still cursing under his breath, and the two of them walked away while the crowd watched. The people then broke into small groups and began to quietly discuss the scandal they had just witnessed, leaving Marty standing angry and humiliated. Confused, he made his way through the crowd to his SUV. That evening, Marty could only talk to Terry and his wife Sally about the morning meeting. It pained them to hear Marty's outrage at the false accusation mixed with the pain of Louise's betrayal. As they listened, Terry and Sally exchanged worried glances and did their best to help Marty with expressions of sympathy and support. Finally, they calmed him down enough for him to eat dinner. Terry then asked Marty what he was going to do next. "I don't know, Terry. I've never experienced anything like this before," Marty admitted. "Well, I know what you have to do first on Monday," Sally said. "You better find yourself a good lawyer. There is a lot at stake in this divorce, and you better be protected." "Hell, I don't even know a single lawyer," Marty said helplessly. "My uncle is one of them," Terry said. The prospect of a lengthy legal battle was daunting, but Marty realized his friends were right, so he took the phone number. "What about the printing house?" asked Terry. "Are you going to come to work on Monday?" Marty nodded vigorously. "Oh yes, of course. With everything so up in the air, I just need to keep my job no matter what. I still have bills to pay and I can't live on my parents forever. I'll be there Monday afternoon as always." When Marty pulled up to the printing plant on Monday, shortly before his shift began, the familiar routine calmed him somewhat, but it did not last long. The shift manager was waiting for Marty at the service entrance and took him to his office. "Marty, I need to tell you something. Bobby Womack came here today and quit. He told everyone who would listen that he would live with your wife and do it with your lottery money." As you can imagine, this little gossip spread throughout the printing house like a forest fire. "Look, if you want to take another vacation, I'll definitely understand." As the shift manager spoke, Marty's head sank lower and lower, but eventually he raised his head with a determined look on his face. "Thank you, but I guess I'll go and do my job. People will still talk no matter what I do, so I think I might face that later as well as now." As he walked onto the landing, Terry came up to him and said quietly, "Hold on, guy." The rest of the workers seemed to avoid him as much as possible, but Marty could hear conversations in the background, followed by a few chuckles. He had difficulty concentrating on his work, and at one point, Terry stopped him from making a mistake. By the end of his shift, he had to force himself to stop himself from running out the door to his SUV. The next morning, Marty drove into town to meet his new lawyer, Uncle Terry. The lawyer listened to Marty's account of what happened and then reviewed the petition that was filed with him. When he finished, he looked at Marty. Since you two don't have children, everything will be quite simple. Georgia is a community property state, which means that the two of you will split all of your assets in half, with each of you getting half. Wait a minute, Marty exclaimed. But I was the one who bought the lottery ticket. Doesn't that mean anything? Sorry, said the lawyer. You contributed property to the marriage, so it is considered community property. The same would have happened if Lewis had bought the ticket instead of you. Marty wasn't happy about this, but then another worry popped into his head. What about the house? I put a lot of work into renovating it, remodeling it, and adding more space. Didn't I deserve it? The lawyer shook his head. Marty, the court won't want to waste time finding out who did what and how much it costs. The law stipulates that both partners are equal and both partners will share the assets. So unless the two of you come up with something else, you'll probably sell the house and split the proceeds. It's just not fair, Marty muttered. It may not be fair, but that's the law, said the lawyer. But look at it this way. With the fact that you won the lottery, you will come out of this situation in a much better financial position than most people who get divorced. Let me think, and I'll call you back, Marty said, and headed towards the door. On the way home, he kept thinking about everything that had happened. A month ago, my main concern was getting used to working the second shift, he thought sadly. 2 weeks ago, all I was worried about was spending a fortune. Now my wife kicked me out of the house, she lies behind my back. People either laugh at me or curse me. I had to move in with my parents again, and my life has turned to crap. Winning the damn lottery only made things worse, not better. Over the next 2 weeks, Marty became a recluse. He went to work every evening, but kept to himself. During the day, he spent most of his time doing chores around his parents' house to help them. Unable to work in his own home, he devoted the rest of his time to daily training. All this time, he thought about what happened and gradually began to formulate a plan on how to get his life back. The next time he saw Terry and Sally, Marty told them what he had learned from the lawyer and what he had decided to do. Terry was shocked. Are you sure this is what you want, boy? I've thought a lot, Terry, and this is right for me, Marty said with conviction. Okay, buddy, if that's what you want, I'll support you, but a lot of people will think you're crazy, Terry said. Maybe they're right, Marty smiled wryly. The following Friday, Marty and his lawyer went to a meeting at Louise's lawyer's office to discuss the property matter. Marty wasn't surprised to see Bobby Womack. After everyone was seated, Louise's lawyer began to discuss an equal division of the family property, but Marty stopped him. This is not the way I want to do it, he said firmly. Before he could continue, his lawyer spoke up. I would like to put it on record that I warned my client that what he was about to propose was not in his best interests, but he chose to ignore my advice. The lawyer leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms over his chest as a sign of irritation. Marty took the prepared document and leaned forward. I'm offering a deal, Louise. I'll give you a lottery ticket. You'll get all the money, all the damn money. All I want in return is my home back and to make you admit what you did. All this is written down on this paper. He slid the copy across the table. Louise began to protest, but Bobby grabbed her hand and whispered something insistently. Her lawyer was clearly taken by surprise by Marty's proposal. After some confusion, he asked for a few minutes to speak with his client in private, and all three left the room. Uncle Terry leaned towards Marty. I still want you to change your mind. There is no need to give up all your winnings. Heck, you could buy out Louise's share of the house and you'd still have a ton of money left over. Marty shook his head stubbornly. I've thought about this a lot, and this is what I want to do. In another conference room, Louise objected loudly. I'm not going to sign anything like that. If I do this, my dad will seriously kick my ass after what I told him about Marty. Before the lawyer could speak, Bobby grabbed her hand. What's the difference, Lulu? Bobby began ingratiatingly. Who cares what your dad or anyone else thinks? You and I will still leave this city. Besides, sooner or later everyone will find out what happened. The important thing is that if you agree, we will get all the money, and not just half, to spend it the way we want. Louise calmed down, but not completely. Well, what about the house? You said I'd get half of him, and now he's trying to sneak out. Bobby spoke quickly. Baby, can't you see? It is even better. Marty is basically buying your half of the house for $5 million. For $10 million, you can buy a bunch of houses. The lawyer cleared his throat. Technically, it's not exactly 10 million. Yes, Bobby interrupted him. We know that Uncle Sam should get his share. But the thing is, it's a hell of a lot of money. And if Marty's crazy enough to turn it down, then you'd be crazy not to take it. I have to agree, the lawyer began. This is a much better outcome than anything you could get in court. Forcing the sale of your home in its current unfinished state will get you almost nothing compared to receiving the rest of your lottery winnings. As for the recognition of extramarital activities from a legal point of view, this does not matter. We have a no-fault state. In such a case, the court does not care who did what to whom. Luis's face brightened. Well, if it means nothing and we get the full $10 million out of the deal, then I guess my only question is, where do I sign? The three returned to the main conference room, and Luis ostentatiously signed the agreement prepared by Marty's lawyer. When Marty received his copy back, he asked, "Okay, when can I get my house back?" Luis looked at Bobby, who nodded. "On Monday, we will go to the lottery office and pick up the money. We're moving the next day, so you'll receive the key in the evening." As Bobby and Louise stood up to leave the room, Bobby leaned over and slapped Louise's palm. "We hit the jackpot, Lulu," he gloated. He then looked back at Marty and grabbed Louise's ass. Returning to his parents' house, Marty went in search of his mother. Finding his parents sitting in front of the TV, he walked over and handed her a copy of the agreement Louise had just signed. "Do you want to know why Louise left me? Come on, read this." And he pointed to the appropriate section. "It says in clear English that she left me because she had sex with Bobby Womack behind my back. It was her idea. I didn't do anything to give her a reason to leave." Having finished reading, his mother looked guiltily at her son. "I'm sorry I doubted you, son. Who would have thought that Luis would behave like this?" Meanwhile, his father was reading the contract and suddenly exclaimed, "Are you crazy, Marty? It says here that you gave Louise all $10 million. Why the hell are you doing this?" "Dad, you always said that there is nothing more important than a good name. Well now, my good name is back." The old man looked at him strangely. "That's a damn high price, son." "It's worth it, Dad," Marty said firmly. "To the last penny." The following Sunday, Marty got up early and put on his best church clothes, but waited until the service began. As he entered the chapel and sat down in the front pew, a murmur ran through the congregation, but Marty ignored it. When the service ended, Marty stood up and asked permission to address the congregation. Standing in front of them, he cleared his throat nervously before beginning. "I know that many of you now have a rather low opinion of me, but I have something here that I would like to read to you. Louise, my future ex-wife, made this statement last Friday in front of witnesses. If any of you would like to take a look, I have posted a copy on the notice board by the door. Now I will read it to you. I, Louise Luttrell, Good Pasture, hereby acknowledge that I am separating from my husband, Martin Good Pasture, in order to pursue my relationship with Bobby Womack. I started this relationship with Bobby secretly while Marty and I were married, without my husband's knowledge or approval. The breakdown of our marriage occurred solely on my initiative. Marty did nothing to cause it. I declare that this is a true statement made of my own free will, without pressure or coercion. Louise Luttrell, Good Pasture. As the congregation began to murmur excitedly, Bobby walked down the center aisle until he came to the pew where the Luttrells sat. "Mr. Luttrell, the other day you made some very harsh accusations against me. You didn't believe me, but maybe you will believe your own daughter?" With these words, he thrust another copy of Louise's testimony into his father's hands. The old man looked at the signature, and his face turned pale. He handed it to his wife, who had already begun to cry. "Damn Bobby Womack," he swore. Marty looked at them both and felt a surge of pity. "Looks like she's fooled us all, Mr. Luttrell," he said quietly. With these words, he turned and walked out of the building with his head held high. Monday night's shift was relatively normal, except that Marty's appearance at church was a big topic of conversation. But the next night brought new entertainment. The television in the break room was tuned to the local radio station, and the main news of the day was a report about the winner of the local lottery. There were cheers and hoots in the break room as a jubilant Louise received a giant check from the Georgia lottery and quickly hugged Bobby Womack, whom the announcer called her groom. Terry tried his best to keep the nosy and obnoxious ones away from his friend, but Marty still had to endure more ridicule about how he had lost both the lottery money and his wife to another man. The only thing that allowed Marty to survive this evening was the knowledge that after work, he would be able to return home. His clothes and personal belongings were packed in the SUV, and after finishing his shift, he headed straight for the house. As promised, Louise left the keys to the new locks in the mailbox. When he opened the door and turned on the light, he discovered that the house was a complete mess. Moving trash was strewn throughout the house, food was left on the table, and dirty dishes filled the sink. "I bet this woman hasn't cleaned the house once since I moved out," he thought bitterly. After a restless night's sleep, Marty woke up early Wednesday morning and began cleaning up, starting in the kitchen. After washing the sink and dishes, he made coffee and went out to get the newspaper. To his horror, he found there a photograph of himself and an article entitled, "The World's Unluckiest Lottery Winner." The story detailed how Marty won, and subsequently lost, a $10 million jackpot, giving it all to his soon-to-be ex-wife. The author seemed to find the situation funny, but Marty did not. If the newspaper article didn't upset his stomach enough, the phone call Marty received from his sister an hour later certainly did. "Is it true what they write in the newspaper?" she asked aggressively. When he admitted that this was mostly true, his sister snapped at him. "Why can't you do anything right, Marty? We were going to borrow money from you for a down payment on a house. You just ruined our plans." Then she hung up. Maybe I shouldn't expect a Christmas card from her this year, he thought, trying to make light of it. But the truth was that he felt bad for not being able to help his older sister. She and her husband were going through a financial crisis, and he would be happy to lend her some money if he could. The humiliation of being the source of endless gossip, combined with the loneliness of life without Louise after they had been married for so long, plunged Marty into a monastic lifestyle in the following months. With the exception of occasional visits to his parents or to Terry and Sally, Marty devoted most of his free time to working on the house he had reclaimed at such great cost. He continued to redesign and renovate the existing structure and then undertook an ambitious expansion. One of the few bright spots for Marty was the pleasant discovery that the money problems he had before winning the lottery soon disappeared. His simple lifestyle, combined with not having to pay for Louise's extravagance, not only balanced his budget, but also provided the additional funds needed for renovations. From time to time, his friends and relatives tried to set Marty up with some woman, but although Marty did not refuse, none of the dates led to anything. After a while, it became obvious that he was not ready to commit to another woman, and his friends eventually decided to leave him alone until he was ready. Almost a year later, Terry called him on a Saturday. "Can you help me, buddy? My younger sister is moving to the city, and I could use some help moving her things to her new apartment." Marty drove to Terry's house to meet his friend, and as the two of them drove to his sister's new apartment, Terry explained the situation. "Nancy is trying to escape from a cruel situation. The last time her husband John hit her, she reported him to the police and then called me. She has started divorce proceedings, but she is afraid of this bastard and tries to stay as far away from him as possible." "I hate men who beat women," Marty replied. Then he looked back and saw where Terry was directing him. "Are you sure this is the right address? This is not the best place for a single woman to live." "I know," Terry said, "but that's all she can afford right now. I would take her to my place, but we don't have room. Besides, it's not just her, she also has a 4-year-old daughter." Just then, they arrived at a rundown apartment complex and noticed a rental van parked at the entrance. After Marty parked his SUV, Terry got out and walked over to hug his sister and niece. When Terry introduced Marty, Nancy shook his hand, but Marty noticed that she was not looking at him directly. He also noticed the remains of a bruise under her eye and felt anger rise within him. The girl was not as timid as her mother. She walked up to him and looked up. "I'm Lily," she said. "You are a good man?" Marty couldn't help but smile. "I guess I'm a pretty good person," he said. "Okay, then you can be my friend," she said, and extended her hand to him. Marty laughed and shook it. "Okay, Lily, let's be friends." Then he turned and began helping Terry unload the SUV. After they both finished, Nancy offered them a cold drink and thanked them for their help. "Don't let Lily bother you," she said quietly to Marty. "She's just a little lonely." "Oh, she doesn't bother me at all," Marty replied. "I still love children." Nancy smiled gratefully. From then on, Marty usually saw them when Terry and Sally invited him to dinner. He learned that while Nancy worked at Walmart in town, Sally would babysit Lily along with her girls. Considering how much Nancy probably made at Walmart, Marty assumed that Terry and Sally were also helping her financially, but Terry never said anything about it. A month later, while Terry was helping Marty with the plumbing, his cell phone rang. When he picked up the phone, the look on his face told Marty that something bad had happened. "We'll be right there," Terry shouted and slammed the phone. "This is Nancy," Terry shouted. It seemed to her that John was looking through the window of their apartment. "Come on," Marty said. "My SUV is right in front of the house." The two men rushed to Nancy's house. Marty grabbed a wrench from the toolbox and ran towards Nancy's block, Terry close on his heels. They saw a tall man angrily pounding on the door, and Marty shouted, "Hey you, get out of here!" Seeing Marty and Terry running towards him, the man quickly ducked around the corner of the building and disappeared. While Terry went to see if he had left, Marty knocked on Nancy's door. "Nancy, it's me, Marty. He is no longer there. Open up." After a moment's hesitation, Nancy opened the door a crack and looked out. Recognizing Marty, she opened the door and let him in. "Are you okay?" Marty asked insistently. "I'm shaking, but I'm not hurt," she said with tears. "Where is Lily?" he asked. "I sent her to the bedroom," Nancy replied, and Marty quickly walked down the hallway to check on her. At first, he didn't see the girl anywhere, but just when he was about to panic, he noticed a socked foot sticking out from under the bed. He dropped to his hands and knees and looked under the bed. "Hello, Lily. It's me, Marty. You can go out now." When the girl crawled out from under the bed, she jumped into Marty's arms and he carried her back to the front of the apartment, where Terry was comforting Nancy. "Why did my dad yell at us?" asked Lily. "Why did he offend his mother?" "I don't know, Lily," Marty said, "but he's gone now." Terry's nod confirmed this. "And we won't let him hurt you or Mom anymore." "That's right," Terry said, "and you're moving into my home tonight." Nancy looked at him gratefully, and, having locked the apartment, all four squeezed into the cab of Marty's SUV. On the way back, Terry called his wife, and Sally was already waiting for them at the door. She hugged Nancy and leaned over to hug Lily. "I know everything," she said to the girl. "Let's have a sleepover with us tonight." Lily beamed at this idea and went to play with Sally's children. The four adults sat down in the living room. Terry turned to his sister and said firmly, "Everything is decided. You will not return to that apartment again. Now that John knows where you live, there's a chance he'll come back." "But I can't force myself on you like that," Nancy protested. "There's simply no room in your house for the two of us. I'll be fine in the apartment. After today, John won't dare come back. You're just not safe there." "We'll manage somehow, sis," Terry replied stubbornly. The three continued to argue while Marty sat and listened. Finally, he spoke. "Maybe there is another option," and the others turned to him. "I have a big old house in which there is no one but me. You can stay with me if you want." Then he blushed, realizing what he had just said. "I mean, you can stay in the new bedroom I added. She has her own bathroom and it doesn't even have furniture yet, so we could put your things in there. Besides, I work the evening shift, so it's unlikely you'll ever see me." His voice trailed off as he thought about how his proposal might sound to Nancy. "Maybe this isn't such a good idea," he continued sheepishly, but Terry intervened. "No, that's a great idea, if you don't mind, Marty." He turned to his sister. "Listen, Marty has been my best friend for a long time, and Sally and I both vouch for him. John doesn't know where to look for you, so you'll be safe there. At least this will give us time to come up with something else for the long haul." Nancy was hesitant, not wanting to intrude, but Sally and Terry convinced her, and Terry and Marty left in Marty's SUV to begin moving Nancy's meager belongings to Marty's house. When they finished, Sally brought Nancy and Lily over so they could tour the house. Nancy was grateful, but Lily was not impressed. "Well, where is your swing?" she asked, looking out the back window. Marty smiled. "I don't have them, Lily, but there is a park nearby, and your mother can take you there to play." "Well then, I think everything is in order," said the girl, and the issue was resolved. The first few days of the new arrangement were a bit awkward as Marty and Nancy tried to stay out of each other's way as much as possible. During the week, this was no problem since Nancy worked during the day and Marty left for work before she returned. But weekends are a completely different matter. On Saturday morning, Marty woke up to the smell of cooking coming from the kitchen. After showering and dressing, he discovered that Nancy and Lily had prepared a large breakfast of bacon and eggs. "That's great, but you shouldn't have worried so much," Marty said gratefully to Nancy, sipping his coffee. "You were so kind to me and Lily, so it was the least I could do." Nancy smiled. Lily looked at him over her plate. "You snore," she said, and her mother gasped. Marty just laughed. "You're right, Lily, it's so—" He fell silent, and his face darkened. But he quickly regained his smile and continued, "I've already been told about this." After breakfast, Marty went out into the backyard to do gymnastics, and Lily came out to watch him. "What are you doing?" she asked curiously. "I'm doing exercises," Marty replied. "Oh, what is exercise?" asked Lily. "It's a game that adults play," Marty answered. "Do you want to try?" When the girl nodded, he made her stand, placing his hands on her waist. "Now pull your hands up and put them behind your head, and then touch your shoulders. Then bend down and touch your knees and toes," he told her, showing her what to do. "Not very fun," she said irritably. Marty's childhood memory flashed back to him. "That's because I didn't tell you the other part of the exercise. You have to hum." With these words, Marty began to chant, "Head and shoulders, knees, toes," without ceasing to perform the ritual. Lily quickly picked up the simple melody and began to repeat the movements with him. Nancy came out to the back porch to look. "Don't bother Mr. Goodpasture, Lily," she shouted. "It's okay," Marty said quickly. "We're playing." He continued to show Lily a series of warm-up exercises before starting her morning run. "If you want, Lily, we can repeat this tomorrow," he told the girl before leaving. From that moment on, every time the little girl got up when Marty went out to do his exercises, she wanted to do them with him. She couldn't do all the exercises or do them as long as Marty, but she loved playing head and shoulders, as she called it, with him. At first, Nancy just watched them to make sure Lily wasn't causing problems, but after a while she also started doing gymnastics. At first, she lacked stamina, but soon she began to keep up without difficulty. As Marty went through all the procedures, he couldn't help but notice how good she looked in shorts and a t-shirt. After warming up, Marty went for a morning run, and Nancy and Lily went into the house to prepare breakfast. By the time he returned, a hearty meal was already waiting for him. After living on cereal boxes for so long, Marty found home-cooked breakfast a real treat. On weekdays, while Nancy worked in the store and Lily stayed with Sally and her children, Marty continued to renovate the house. He paid special attention to the bedroom and bathroom that Nancy and Lily shared, trying to make it more enjoyable for the two of them. He had been alone for a long time and found that he enjoyed having housemates, even if it was somewhat unusual. Work that evening was unremarkable, but as he was cleaning up before going home, Marty heard two other men in the restroom mention a name he hadn't heard in a long time. "You'll never guess who my brother saw last weekend," Bobby Womack. My brother was in Atlanta, the man said, and he ran into Bobby and Louise at a nightclub. Bobby told him that they had just returned from Atlantic City. They spent the money like water and then took him to their mansion in the richest area of the city. My brother said they lived like a king and queen. The mention of his ex-wife and the man who took her from him brought back all the anger and pain that Marty thought was long gone. He drove home, remembering all the events associated with Louise's betrayal and Marty's subsequent humiliation. By the time he got there, he was so tense that he knew he wouldn't be able to sleep, so he sat in a chair and quietly turned on the TV, hoping it would distract him. A few minutes later, he heard a sound behind him and looked back to see Lily peeking around the corner. "What are you doing at this late hour, young lady?" he asked with a smile on his face. The little girl entered the room completely. "I woke up and couldn't sleep. Would you read me a story?" Marty felt that he should be strict with her and order her to return to bed, but she looked at him so pleadingly that he could not refuse her. "Okay," he said, "just one." She beamed and quickly disappeared into her bedroom to find a book. By the time Marty turned off the TV, she was back with a book tucked under her arm. Without hesitation, she climbed onto his lap. "Read this one, Uncle Marty," she asked. Marty smiled and, leaning back in his chair, began to calmly read from a Dr. Seuss book that he had known since childhood. Soon, the girl closed her eyes, but Marty did not know whether she had fallen asleep or not, so he continued to read in a quiet, sing-song voice. He was awakened by the smell of breakfast being cooked and found himself still lying in his chair with Lily sleeping on his chest, covered with a blanket. He rolled onto his side to get Lily into the chair, wrapped her in a blanket, and walked into the kitchen. Nancy smiled at him over the stove and said, "Looks like you got tired of your audience last night." Marty blushed. "I'm sorry about that. I didn't want to wake her, but she said she couldn't sleep and wanted me to read to her and—" Nancy just brushed off his apology. "You were so sweet when you read to her. I hope she didn't bore you." "Oh no," Marty said hastily. "I'm not tired at all. Actually, I actually liked it." Nancy smiled again and went back to scrambling the eggs. A week later, they all gathered at Terry and Sally's house for a picnic. Nancy played with the children in the backyard, while Marty helped Sally set up the picnic table. The laughter of one of the girls caught their attention, and after watching them for a minute, Sally turned to Marty. "Well, how are you doing with Nancy and Lily?" she asked casually. "Oh, it's okay," Marty replied. "In fact, there are no problems with them." Sally looked at him shrewdly. "What do you think about Nancy?" "She's great," Marty replied. "She is a wonderful mother and a very good cook." "Have you ever thought about inviting her somewhere?" Sally insisted. "You mean on a date?" Marty asked in surprise. "I don't know, Sally. It might be awkward. What with them living in my house and everything," he said. "Besides, Nancy might feel awkward if I ask. Maybe she won't want to. She probably doesn't think of me that way." Sally just smiled at him. "You might be surprised, Marty." "Anyway, just think about it," she said before calling the others over for dinner. Over the next few days, Marty mentally mulled over Sally's proposal. There was no doubt that he was attracted to Nancy. When she went out into the backyard with him to exercise, Marty had a hard time maintaining his attention to his normal routine. She was slim and fit, and the way her body moved in shorts and a t-shirt was definitely distracting. Moreover, she was a pleasant, laid-back person, so different from Louise. But since his ex-wife left, Marty has avoided the opposite sex, first out of a reluctance to expose himself to more heartache, and then because of a lack of attractive prospects. Now, although he was certainly attracted to Nancy, he was worried that any attempt to change their relationship might affect it if it didn't work out. He was used to having family in the house, and he didn't want to leave her if Nancy became uncomfortable. If she felt she had to leave, he would miss Lily too. All in all, it was a big step, and Marty was hesitant to break the status quo. He was still debating the matter with himself that evening as he drove home from work. But his dilemma was immediately forgotten when he noticed an unknown car parked in front of his house. His anxiety turned to fear when he saw that the car was parked on the side of the road at an angle, as if the driver was in a hurry. Then he saw that the front door of his house was wide open and light was pouring onto the lawn. John found her, he thought, his heart pounding at the thought of what he might find inside. He quickly parked his SUV on the street and ran into the garage. His ears began to ring as he pulled a pistol from its hiding place. Moving to the front of the house, he chambered around. As he approached the front door, he heard screams from inside and cautiously peered around the door frame. A man who looked like the intruder Marty had seen at Nancy's apartment a few months ago was standing in the living room, holding Nancy by the shoulders and shaking her. Marty was sure it was John, her ex-husband, and fear made it difficult for him to breathe. Everything seemed to go into slow motion. He gripped the gun tightly as he opened the door and slipped inside without either of them seeing him. He slowly raised his pistol and shouted, "Freeze now, John!" The man turned around in surprise, still holding Nancy close to him. Seeing Marty, he put his arm around the frightened woman's waist and held her tightly to him. At the same time, he pulled a revolver from the waistband of his trousers and pointed it at Nancy's head. "Don't come closer," he warned. All three froze for a long moment. Suddenly, Lily appeared from the back hallway. "Mother!" she screamed and rushed to her mother, but Marty grabbed her hand and pulled her back before she could get to them. "Stay still, Lily," he ordered. The girl began to cry, and Marty noticed that the man was becoming more excited by the second. In desperation, Marty tried to find anything that could be done to resolve this standoff. He felt Lily trying to escape his embrace, and suddenly a memory popped into his head. He looked down at Lily and said in a calm voice, "Lily, since we're all awake, how about we do some exercise? Do you agree?" Lily looked at him uncertainty, but then nodded. Marty looked up and caught Nancy's eye. "Mom can do exercises too. It will be fun." John looked at Marty in complete confusion, but Marty could only focus on Nancy and beg her to understand. He thought he saw something in her gaze and prayed it was true. He turned back to Lily. "Okay, Lily, now we'll all play head and shoulders. Let's take it real slow, like always, okay?" When the girl nodded, Marty said, "Okay, Lily. Okay, Mommy, let's start. Head and shoulders," he said, drawing out his words. The girl obediently put her hands behind her head, then on her shoulders. "Knees, toes," Marty continued, and Nancy bent at the waist to touch the floor. As soon as she did, Marty fired at the attacker, hitting him in the upper chest. The man chuckled and backed away, allowing Nancy to slide to the floor. Nancy and Lily screamed when they heard the sound, and Marty's second bullet flew up and to the left. The man began to raise the revolver, but Marty's third shot hit him in the forehead, knocking him to the floor. Nancy ran to Lily and hugged her tightly, while Marty rushed to the lifeless body and knocked the gun out of his hand. Then he grabbed his cell phone and dialed 911. When he finished with the police dispatcher, he called Terry. "Get here quickly, buddy. John was here," he said. After hanging up, he carefully placed the gun on the mantelpiece and walked over to Nancy and Lily, who were lying embraced on the floor. Suddenly, all the adrenaline seemed to flow out of him, like air from a punctured balloon. He collapsed on the floor and cried, clutching them both in his arms. "I thought I lost you," he sobbed over and over again. That's how the police found them when they came through the door. The detectives' questions didn't take long, but Marty refused to let go of Nancy and Lily the entire time, and they clung to him equally tightly. 2 years later, on a Saturday afternoon, Marty was getting ready for a barbecue. He invited Terry, Sally, and their children, and he wanted the house to look neat and clean. Although it won't be for long, he thought with a laugh. There was still at least an hour left before the meeting started, so he was startled when the doorbell rang. When he opened it, he saw a woman with platinum-bleached hair that was dark at the roots. She was wearing rather revealing clothes and high-heeled shoes, clearly expensive, but seemingly well-worn. She stood looking at him with a slight smile on her face, and it took him a minute to recognize her. "Hello, Louise," he said evenly. "I look like?" she asked with feigned modesty, and slowly pirouetted so that he could see her figure. When she turned back to him, she pretended to highlight her breasts with her hands. "How do you like them?" she asked. "I made them. Now they are a full-size 4. Marty walked out onto the porch and closed the door behind him. "What do you want, Louise?" he asked briefly. She shook her head in mock displeasure. "Is this really the right way to greet me after all these years? I thought you'd be glad to see me." "I thought you were in Atlanta," he said. "It was, but it was a long time ago. Now I'm back in the city, and of course, the first thing I wanted to do was come and look at you. You've lost some weight. Looks like you're in really good shape." She smiled flirtatiously at him. "Of course, you have always been a handsome man." Her compliment went unnoticed by Marty. "I was working on the house to finish it," he said. She looked around as if seeing the house for the first time. "Wow, you did so much to this house. It looks great. Did you add anything to it? I don't remember what was there." "Listen, Louise, I don't really have time to chat. I'll have guests soon, and I need to finish getting ready." There was alarm in her voice. "Of course, Marty, of course. But the thing is, now that I'm back in town, I thought maybe you and I, could start dating again." Despite his best efforts to remain calm, Marty was clearly surprised. "What about Bobby Womack?" he asked in surprise. Louise's face distorted into a grimace. "That bastard!" she exclaimed furiously. "He stole a lot of money from me and ran away from town." She shook her head in disgust. It took the cops 6 months to catch him in Las Vegas, and by then, all the money he stole was gone. But don't worry about him. He has a very comfortable room now in the Macon State Penitentiary. "So what happened to the rest of the 10 million? Marty asked. "Ha! It's better for you to know what it is. After the cut for taking it all in cash, and after the feds and the state took their cut, it was closer to $5 million, she said bitterly. "Maybe so, Louise, but $5 million is nothing to sneeze at," Marty insisted. Louise's gaze became distant and a slight smile appeared on her face. "Oh, things were pretty nice for a while. Bobby and I bought ourselves a mansion in Atlanta. We had fancy cars, nice clothes, and everything you could expect. You should have seen the parties we threw, Marty. We had live orchestras playing, and Dom Perignon flowed like a river. We went to Vegas all the time. There we were treated like Arab oil sheiks, and we went to all the best shows and everything. One day we chartered a plane and took 20 of our friends with us. Then the smile disappeared from her face. The fact is that when we played, most of the time we lost. And all these friends we had weren't really friends. They were just slackers. They always extended their hands for a loan, and none of them ever returned the money. They were happy to have fun with us, but when things got tough, they scattered like cockroaches when the lights were turned on." She shook her head as if trying to get rid of bad memories. "Anyway, somewhere along the way, Bobby found a wonderful investment that was going to make us a fortune. Well, another fortune. But it turned out to be a scam, and the money disappeared, just like our so-called friends. Around this time, Bobby made off with the rest of our bank account. After that, the bank took the house and our cars, and here I am. So all the money's gone? All $5 million? Marty asked. She nodded sadly. "And you came back here looking for help?" he continued. She looked at him hopefully and nodded again. "Well, you're lucky," he said. "The nursing home where you used to work is hiring. I bet you could come back." He saw the anger flash across her face, but she took a deep breath and pulled herself together. "Come on, Marty. You know that's not what I meant. Besides, you and I once had something very good. If you would just give me another chance, I know I could make amends," she said meaningfully, swaying her hips in a way that left no doubt as to what she meant. Before Marty could respond, Nancy came out the door and stood next to Marty. "Everything is okay, dear?" she asked. He hugged her, and Louise's breath caught when she saw Nancy's belly. "It was very nice of you to visit us, Louise, but my wife and I have guests and we need to get ready." With these words, he followed Nancy inside, closing the door behind him. "Who was it, honey?" asked Nancy. "Nobody special, just someone I knew before," he said dismissively. Later that day, Marty and Terry grilled steaks while their children played on the swing set in the yard, watched over by Sally and Nancy. Terry looked at his friend with admiration. "I have to admit, you were right about Louise and Bobby. I would never have believed that someone could blow $5 million, but they did it. How did you know this?" Marty nodded thoughtfully. "People who are stupid and unreliable when they are poor do not become better when they become rich. I could not imagine that everything would end differently. The only thing that surprised me was that it took them so long to derail everything." At that moment, he heard Lily's joyful cry and, raising his head, saw her playing with her mother. Nancy turned around and, seeing Marty watching them, smiled and waved. Marty waved back and smiled. His friend turned and looked at him. "You're lucky," Terry said. "Yeah," said Marty. "I think I got the big win in the lottery." Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one.